By far, one of the most requested videos on my channel is how I edit my photos, and that is exactly what we're going to talk about today. We are here in studio with my friend and model Ella. Ella, say hi.
Hello.
And we are going to do a portrait session before heading back home to talk about how I edit these photos. And a huge shout out to Reblum for sponsoring this video. I'll touch on them a lot more when we get back home to edit these photos. Ella, you ready to shoot?
Yeah.
Let's do it. Alright, we just wrapped our shoot, now it's time to go home and edit the photos. Let's go. Alright, so we're back home from the studio and it's time to go ahead and edit these photos. My photo editing workflow goes in 3 parts. Part number 1 is to cull through the images and select the ones that I'm actually going to go ahead and edit. Part number 2 is to edit the photos in Lightroom for color and overall tone. And then part number 3 for portraits in specific is retouching. And for that, we're going to use my favorite tool for retouching, which is Reblum, but more on that in a second. Okay, so we are in Adobe Lightroom here, and I've gone ahead and selected this image as our example image that we're going to go ahead and edit for this video. And before I touch anything, before I even look at a single dial or slider on Lightroom, I want to analyze the picture and ask myself, okay, what is this image? What are the colors? Where's the light coming from? Where do I want the edit to go? And for this image, what I see is obviously our subject Ella is the focal point, and she is wearing a black bodysuit. In addition to that, the background as well as the furniture is all the same kind of gray-white tone, which her skin tone and what she's wearing. Now I'm going to start my edit by applying a preset. It's actually my preset that I plan on selling pretty soon. It's called the Core preset. And so in Lightroom over here, I'm going to select my preset and bring down the amount somewhere around 70%. In Lightroom, this is the strength of the preset that you just applied. Now this Core preset does apply a really nice base layer to my image, but every image is different, every scenario is different. So I'm going to run through top to bottom what I do in Lightroom and how that affects the image. First up, with white balance, I'm going to select my white balance selector here and drop it on something that I know is white in the image. In this case, the wall is a good place to start. The picture is immediately going to shift colors, both the temperature and the tint, to something that is correct white balance for this scenario. The exposure to me does look pretty tack on this image. I'm looking at the highlights on her face to make sure that they're not blown out. I might bring it down just a hair. And then for my contrast, I like where it is personally. I might drop it just a bit. For highlights, I'm going to drop it down to maybe somewhere around -55. Actually, I'm going to bring my exposure back up to plus 0.05. The shadows on this image, I'm going to lift quite significantly because I want a lot of that shadow detail under her chin and on the darker side of her face and towards her bodysuit to really be lifted up. The whites on this picture are absolutely gorgeous, and I'm going to make them pop just a little bit. Here is what the whites look like at around 0, and that is also really good, but I'm going to drop it just a bit to around -10. And the blacks being at -3 keep all the black parts of the images nice and subtly rich. My texture and clarity are both at 0 for this image, and my dehaze is at +1. Really, that could be at 0, but I like it just slightly raised at around +1 or +2. I think it adds a bit of pop to the image. Both my vibrance and my saturation sliders are in the negatives because I tend to compensate with individual colors down below in the HSL sliders. So for this image, I have my vibrance at -10 and my saturation also at -13. Now the tone curves that I've built for this preset are pretty dialed in, so I'm not going to change anything, but I will show you what each of them are doing. The first tone curve that comes up on Lightroom is just the entire image from dark to light, or from black to white, black being on the bottom left or your shadows, and white or highlights being on the top right. And all of these points along the white line here are areas in the image from dark to light that you can manually adjust. So for example, if I bring this up, you're going to see how it affects the image. If I bring it down, you're going to see how it affects the image, but I'm going to go back to where it was. This is another example of around the medium tones in the image, how it's going to affect it, and down below, again, I'll go back. And the same is true for these other tone curves for the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. Tone curves are a really finicky and specific thing to describe and learn. I should probably make a whole video about that in the future, but for now, just know that the tone curves for this preset are set like so. Next up, we have our color mixer, where you can adjust the hue, saturation, and luminance of every single color in the image. Starting out with hue, this is basically what color each of the colors is. For example, if I turn the orange slider, which is at -12 at the moment, if I bring that all the way to the left, where on the actual slider it looks to be more red and then magenta, you're going to see that every orange piece in the image also turns red or magenta in this case. Again, the way I've built this preset is to be really complementary for skin tones and for whites, and that is why I'm not really going to tweak this too much for this image, but a few things I will look at for every single image are the saturation and the luminance. Now, every single model is going to have a slightly different skin tone when it comes to the hue, saturation, and luminance of the oranges and the yellows and the reds of the image, but to be honest, I'm pretty happy with where Ella's skin tone falls for this preset. I might drop the oranges just a hair, as well as the yellows a little bit. I'm going to bring up the yellow luminance a bit. This tends to help with brightening up parts of the hair as well as small highlights on the skin. And then I'm going to ever so slightly bring down the luminance for the orange as well to give her a bit more of a fake tan look. Another thing I'm constantly doing is on my keyboard pressing the slash that's right below the delete key. This is a shortcut in Lightroom to show you the before and the current status after of your image. Okay, next up we have the color grading section. Now this is a relatively new area in Lightroom, but it kind of acts like the tone curve, but in a bit more of a color associated way with the shadows, midtones, and highlights. Basically, you can adjust the color and the hue of each the shadow, midtone, and highlights by changing where this circle falls on each of these wheels. For example, have a look at the highlights on this image around the couch or around the walls or even around Ella's forehead here. If I change that to something like a crazy purple like this, you're going to see that all of the white or the highlight parts of the image turn to that hue. Now, me personally, I like a slightly green tinted image, so what I've done is, for the mid-tone slider, I have my saturation at 2 and my hue at 103, the hue being this green color right here, and that will add a ever so slight green tint to the overall image. Both the shadows and the highlights I have around an orange-ish hue with a very small saturation of 8 in the shadows and 2 in the highlights, and this will overall just warm up the image just a bit. Next up, we have detail, which will add sharpening to the overall image. If we zoom into this image here and I bring the sharpening back to 0 where it was shot at, you're going to see it's a lot softer around the nose, around the cheeks, around the eyes, but if I bring up the sharpening to where I want it, which is around 40, you're going to get a lot more sharpening around those parts that I just explained. Now, you want to be careful that you don't go too high on the sharpening because it can tend to break apart the image and look actually less resolution. Even though it is technically adding sharpness, I like to say that less is more with this one. And just for good measure, I have my radius set at 1.2 and my details set at 18. Next up, we have lens corrections, which will correct the distortion and the vignette from whatever lens and camera combination you were using. In this case, I shot this whole shoot with the Tamron 28 to 75mm lens on my Sony a7 IV, which Lightroom has correctly picked up by just enabling profile corrections right here. It will automatically pick up from the metadata what lens you used to shoot the images on. Under the effects tab, I have my grain set to 0 for now. After I do my retouching, I'm going to add grain in then, but not right now because I want to be able to retouch the image without any additional grain that I've added on top of the image in post. And the last but not least is calibration, which in my opinion is a bit of an underutilized tool. Basically what this is meant for is to recalibrate the overall colors and the overall hues in the image that your lens and camera are picking up to kind of trick or compensate for the color science that is baked into the sensor on the camera. Honestly, there's no crazy rhyme or reason as to what I do here, but this is kind of a baseline that I found has worked on so many of my photos, including this one. I have my shadows shifted down to -18, I have my red primary at +8, the green primary at +10, and the blue primary at +4. Okay, now that I'm done editing the picture for color and tone, I'm gonna throw it into Reblum for some retouching. All I have to do is right-click on the image, go to Edit In, and then press Reblum. On this pop-up, I'm gonna select Edit a Copy with Lightroom Adjustments and press Edit. Now the actual Reblum app will load up with the image that you just selected in its own window and automatically start to process the image for retouching. Reblum is a one-click photo editing software that I absolutely swear by. Now, me personally, I'm not a retoucher. I don't really have the time or the energy to spend retouching every single pixel of every single image. It would take way too much time, and honestly, I'm not that good at it, so I'm gonna leave it to the software. Right off the bat, you're gonna notice how easy and simple the Reblum user interface is. It is so easy to use that I can't even imagine ever using any other software, or definitely doing it manually ever again. On the right-hand side of the software, you have the style of retouching, you have natural, and you have fashion. Natural will just help to remove any regular imperfections on the skin, as well as smooth out any wrinkles or soften out any shadows on a portrait, while the fashion option will give much more of a refined and glossy look to the image. Think about like a high fashion photo shoot. Me personally, I like to stick to natural. Below that, you only have two sliders to work with, and they are general and texture. The general slider will change the overall strength of the retouching itself, and the texture slider will help to bring back some of the texture if you feel like it's doing a bit too much. Now, the Reblum software works so fast that you might not even have caught what it's done, but let's zoom in here. I'm gonna zoom right into Ella's face and have a look at what this app is doing. Okay, so right now what you're looking at is with the Reblum retouching applied, but if you press this eyeball down here, you're gonna see what the before looked like. So here's after, and here is before. Now, right away, you can tell that the app has smoothed out, again, any imperfections on the skin. Now, Ella has beautiful skin as it is, but this app is able to remove, again, any of those small blemishes or imperfections while still retaining all of the original texture. Sometimes I like to bring the texture slider back just a bit and the general back just a bit, but in this case, I actually like it cranked all the way to the top. And if we come down here to other parts of her body, for example, the armpits and around the chest, you can also see if I turn it off, it's also gone ahead and retouched around those areas as well. Again, I can't stress enough how easy this is and how crazy effective it is for an application that is literally one click. Another cool benefit of the Reblum app is that it all takes place offline. All the processing takes place offline, so there's nothing in the cloud, nothing online. It is all local, just to your computer. And then once I like what I see, which literally takes 2 seconds, I go ahead and press OK down here on the bottom right. That will export the image back to Lightroom. Okay, so Reblum has automatically brought the image back into Lightroom with the retouching applied, and the only thing left for me to do is, like I said before, add in some grain. For me, less is more with the grain, so I like to usually keep it around 20. And then last but not least, I'm going to crop the image 4x5 for use on social media. I think right there it looks fantastic. Another really awesome feature about Reblum is that you can do batch editing. So for example, let's take this image here and this whole set from number 8 all the way to number 13. I can highlight them all by holding down Shift and pressing the first and last image in a sequence, and then right click them, go to Edit and Reblum. Once Reblum loads up the images, you can see that all the images that I selected in Lightroom are now here down below on the bottom. I can then go through each one and apply my retouching effects and export them back to Lightroom. And if you don't use Lightroom, maybe you use Photoshop or Capture One, Reblum works perfectly integrated with those softwares as well. If you guys do any kind of portrait work, I highly recommend you guys download Reblum as a free trial down below in the description. Plus, through that link, you can also get 20% off all plans. And that is how I edit my photos specifically for a portrait session from start to finish. If you guys like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe down below. Big shout out to Reblum for sponsoring this video. Once again, click that link down below to download a free trial of Reblum today. But until next time, I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.